You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 66. Song Jiang rewards his men, Guanxing makes two generals surrender. When the Grand Secretary and his generals and their followers found themselves surrounded by brigands, they desperately fought their way out and escaped towards the west. The brigand leaders could not catch them, so they returned to Daming Prefecture to await further orders. In the town, Wu Yong had ordered his men to help put out the fires. He also had the treasury opened and had all the loot loaded up. The public grain stores were all opened and much rice was given to the people, and the remainder was loaded up and sent to Liangshan Marsh. Li Gu and Lu Junyi's former wife were confined in prisoners' carts to be conveyed to the mountain stronghold. The brigands then were formed into 3 bodies, and so returned to Liangshan Marsh. Dai Zong having already been dispatched to inform Song Jiang of their complete victory. Upon reaching their stronghold, the brigand leaders were welcomed by Song Jiang, and all assembled in the Loyalty and Justice Hall. When he saw Lu Junyi, Song Jiang kowtowed, and Lu Junyi did likewise. "I was very careless," said Song Jiang, "when I requested you to stay at Liangshan Marsh. I did not think that it would cause so much misery to you. The hardships you underwent made me feel as though a sword had pierced my heart. But heaven helped us, and so today we can see you here again." Lu Junyi saluted and replied, "I am indebted to you for your powerful assistance, and am grateful to all the leaders for their heroism. Your united strength has rescued me from death. Even if my brains and kidney were rubbed on the ground, I could not recompense you for your kindness." He then introduced Kai Fu and Kai Qing, and continued, "I owe a great deal to these jailers who kept me alive and treated me so well." Song Jiang then offered to abdicate his position to Lu Junyi, who was surprised, and said, "What am I to accept your offer? I am only fit to hold your whip and stirrup and act as an ordinary retainer." Song Jiang, however, insisted upon his offer being accepted. "Brother, you are not straightforward," interposed Li Kuei. "You previously consented to occupy this position, but now you want to yield to another man. This chair must be made of real gold that you always regard it as a present. If you keep on yielding it, you will make me resort to my knife." "You fellow," shouted Song Jiang. Lu Junyi hurriedly saluted and said, "If you still press me to take the position, I must leave here." "If Song Jiang became emperor," said Li Kuei, "and Lu Junyi the prime minister, and all of us were now sitting in the gold palace, it would be worthwhile for us to act in these polite ways. But as a matter of fact we are only brigands, so it is better for us to conduct ourselves as such." Wu Yong interposed, "Would it not be better if we treated Lu Junyi as a guest, and ask him to live temporarily in the rooms on the east side? When he has done some meritorious deed, we could then press him to accept the position of commander-in-chief." Song Jiang agreed to this. He then ordered a feast to be prepared for all the men. The leaders had their feast in the Loyalty and Justice Hall, where they all enjoyed themselves. During the feast, Lu Junyi stood up and addressed Song Jiang, "The adulterer and the adulteress are our prisoners here and await your disposal." Song Jiang laughed and replied, "I had forgotten about them. Let the prisoners be brought in." The prisoners were taken out of the cart and tied up to posts in front of the hall. Song Jiang then said, "There is no need to question them as to their crime. We can leave Lu Junyi to deal with them." Lu Junyi took a sword, and going outside he cut both of them open, and took out their hearts. He then hacked their bodies into small pieces. When Grand Secretary Liang heard the news that the brigands had gone back to Liangshan Marsh, he went back to Daming with his general and their few remaining soldiers. There they found what enormous damage had been done, and how their own families and property had been wiped out. He wrote a dispatch to the Prime Minister at the eastern capital giving particulars of the disaster, and requesting that troops be at once dispatched to safeguard the district. Of the civilians about 5,000, and of the soldiers about 30,000, had been killed. Upon reaching the eastern capital, the messenger delivered the dispatch. When first considering the matter, the Prime Minister thought that it would be a good plan to induce the brigands to join the Imperial Army, as Grand Secretary Liang's success would have reflected favorably on himself. But on second thoughts after the debacle at Daming, he realized that that was now impossible, as the brigands had gained such a victory, and as everybody would soon know about it. Therefore he was determined to attack the brigands and re-establish the name of the Imperial Army, as well as his own. The following morning, when the Emperor had his usual audience with his ministers at daybreak, Prime Minister Kai presented a memorial about this disaster. When the Emperor read the same, he was shocked. The Councillor Zhao Ding stepped forward and addressed the throne. Many troops have been dispatched, but they have all been defeated. The brigands have the advantageous positions and so are invincible. My humble opinion is that Your Majesty issue an edict pardoning them for their crimes and conferring upon their leaders official ranks, if they will reform and help you to restore order in the country. Prime Minister Kai was very angry at this and spoke. The councillor's suggestion would endanger the moral dignity of the Emperor. Your crazy proposal makes you worthy of death. In that case, said the Emperor, he will retire from the court. The councillor withdrew and was duly deprived of his office. After that, who would dare to offer any suggestion or reproof about the case? The Emperor then asked Prime Minister Kai Jing, as these brigands are so truculent, who can be deputed to subdue them? I think these brigands have not much power, replied Kai Jing, and therefore we need not dispatch a very big army against them. At Lingzhou there are two men, one is Colonel Shan Tingui, and the other is Colonel Wei Dinghua. I recommend that Your Majesty issue an edict ordering them to take command of an expedition against Liangshan Marsh. The Emperor was pleased at this, and had the edict written at once. He then left the court, and all the officials dispersed. Many of them regarded this event as a laughingstock among themselves. The following day the edict was duly dispatched to Lingzhou to summon the two colonels. At the stronghold on Liangshan Marsh the brigands continued their feasting in celebration of their victory. One day during the feast Wu Yong spoke to Song Jiang, as we have done great damage at Daming Prefecture, you may be sure that the Grand Secretary must write a dispatch to the eastern capital so that we cannot treat the matter as entirely settled. I expect that it will not be long before we are again attacked by the imperial troops. I quite agree with your view, said Song Jiang. Why don't we send spies to Daming Prefecture to find out what is being done, and prepare our men here for the coming attack? Wu Yong laughed and said, I have already sent a spy, and he will soon be back. Duly as they were speaking before the feast was over, the spy arrived, and reported that Grand Secretary Liang had sent a dispatch to the eastern capital asking for reinforcements. He also told them what had occurred at court, and how troops at Lingzhou had been ordered to attack Liangshan Marsh. What shall we do? Asked Song Jiang. Let them come, said Wu Yong. We shall arrest them all. Here Guanxing stood up and addressed them. Since I arrived at Liangshan Marsh I have done nothing yet. I know both of these colonels who are in command of the expedition against us. Colonel Shan Tingui is fond of flooding the enemy's camp by breaking the dams of rivers. For this reason people call him the Water God General. Colonel Wei Dinghua is skillful at the use of fire attack, and therefore is nicknamed the Fire God General. If you will let me have 5,000 men I will go and meet them on their way from Lingzhou before they can reach here. If they will surrender, that would be all right. If they do not surrender, I will bring them to you as captives. I do not need any other leaders to assist me in this matter, as I can manage it myself. Song Jiang was pleased at this offer, and instructed Xianzan and Hao Siwen to accompany Guanxing, under whom they had previously served. The following day they left with 5,000 men. When they had left, the leaders again assembled in the Loyalty and Justice Hall, and there Wu Yong said to Song Jiang, Guanxing has gone, but you cannot guarantee his loyalty, so we had better send a reliable man to watch his movements, but ostensibly to assist him. As I know, said Song Jiang, Guanxing is quite loyal to us. From first to last he is always the same. You need not harbor any suspicion of him. I am afraid that he is not of the same mind as you, said Wu Yong. I suggest that we dispatch another 5,000 men in charge of Lin Chong, and 3 other leaders to follow Guansheng. I also want to go, interposed Li Kuei. We do not need you this time, said Song Jiang, as we have capable leaders for this work. If I am idle I shall soon be sick, said Li Kuei. If you do not let me go, then I will go myself. If you disobey my order, said Song Jiang, I will have your head cut off. Li Kuei did not reply to this, but left the hall with a very downhearted spirit. The men under Lin Chong duly left the next day, and when they had gone a menial reported that the previous night Li Kuei had left the mountain by himself with his 2 axes. Song Jiang was annoyed at this. He said, yesterday I injured his feeling and he must have gone somewhere else. Though he is a rough fellow, said Wu Yong, yet he is very faithful, and I do not think he will desert us. You need not worry, he will return in a few days. But Song Jiang was anxious, and sent Dai Zong to find out where he had gone to. In addition he sent Shi Qian and 3 other leaders to look for him. Li Kuei had as a matter of fact taken the direct road to Lingzhou, and on the way he thought, those 2 colonels are only minor officers, and I cannot understand why we should send so many men to attack them. I will go myself into the town of Lingzhou, and kill those officers with my axes, 1 axe for each man, and that will surprise my brother Song Jiang. Then I shall be able to argue the point with him to my advantage. He walked for half day, and then felt very hungry. He had left the mountain without any money. He soliloquized, I must look out for a traveler and kill him. Soon he came to an inn, and entering he ordered a jug of wine and 3 jin of meat. He sat down and having eaten the food walked out. But the waiter demanded payment, and Li Kuei said, I have some business to transact, and when I come back I will pay you for the food. Just then he saw a big man approaching who shouted to him, You black thief, you have some cheek. You eat our food and won't pay for it. To whom do you think this inn belongs? Li Kuei glared at the man and replied, Wherever I go I never pay for my food. If I tell you who I am you would be pissing and farting in terror, said the man. I am Han Bolong of Liangshan Marsh, and this inn is provided by Song Jiang. Li Kuei was amused at the man's impudence and thought, I do not know this damned fellow at our stronghold. The fact was that this man had tried to join them at Liangshan Marsh, but as Song Jiang was sick at the time he could not see him. Therefore, Zhu Gui told him to open an inn at this point, and await further instructions. Li Kuei took an axe out of his belt, and said, I will leave this in pawn with you for payment. Han Bolong thought this was a genuine offer, and held out his hand for the axe, but Li Kuei lifted it up and cleaved open his head. When the waiters saw this they ran away. Li Kuei went into the inn, and took all the cash about there. He then set fire to the inn which was only made of straw matting. He went on his way, and the following day he met a big man who looked him over very minutely. Li Kuei asked him, Why are you looking at me like that? Who are you? Asked the man. Li Kuei did not reply, but went forward to attack the man. The man avoided the blow, and hit Li Kuei with his fist so that the latter was knocked to his backside. Li Kuei had felt the great strength of the man, so he sat down, and looking upwards asked, What is your name? The man standing over him replied, I have no name, but if you want to fight I'll fight with you. Dare you get up? Li Kuei was angry at this, and jumped up, but at the same moment received a kick in the stomach which sent him sprawling on the ground. I cannot overcome you, said Li Kuei, and getting up was walking off. But the man stopped him, calling out. What is your name and where do you come from? You have beaten me, said Li Kuei, and I do not care to tell you my name. Seeing that you are a fine fellow, however, I will not deceive you. I am Li Kuei, from Liangshan Marsh. Are you speaking the truth now? Asked the man. You need not lie to me. You may not believe me, said Li Kuei, but you can see these 2 axes. As you are from Liangshan Marsh, where are you going alone like this? Asked the man. I had a dispute with our commander-in-chief, because I wanted to go to Lingzhou to kill those 2 officers, Shan and Wei. I have heard that some men have already left Liangshan Marsh. Can you say the name of the leader in charge of them? Asked the man. Guanxing is in charge of the first body of men, and Lin Cheng is supporting him with another body of men. Upon hearing this, the man saluted Li Kuei, who then asked, "Will you not tell me your name now?" The man said, "I am a Zhongshan prefecture man, and my great-grandfather was a great wrestler. My father trained me to fight with the fists, and we have never adopted a pupil. My name is Jiao Ting, but I am called the disliked one. A few days ago I heard that at Kusha Mountain in Kozhou there is a strong brigand named Bao Su, nicknamed God of Death, who is very fond of killing people. I was thinking of going there and joining him." "But instead of that," said Li Kuei, "why not go to Liangshan Marsh and assist Song Jiang?" "I have thought of that too," said Jiao Ting, "but I do not know anybody there who would introduce me. But today, as I have met you, I am willing to accompany you." "I left the mountain in an angry dispute with Song Jiang," said Li Kuei, "and as I have not yet killed those army officers, I cannot very well go back with you. I suggest that we now go to the Kusha Mountain and get Bao Su to join us in killing those two colonels, Shan and Wei, and then we can go to Liangshan Marsh." "At Lingzhou there is a large army," said Jiao Ting, "and we two by ourselves can do nothing. It would be suicidal for us to go there alone. The best plan is for us to go to the Kusha Mountain and get Bao Su to join us at Liangshan Marsh." Just then they were interrupted by Shi Qian, who came up and spoke to Li Kuei. "Our commander, Song Jiang, was very anxious about your disappearing, and sent us in all directions to look for you and bring you back to Liangshan Marsh." Li Kuei introduced Jiao Ting to Shi Qian. He then told Shi Qian of his plan, and said he would first go with Jiao Ting to Kusha Mountain. Shi Qian could not get Li Kuei to change his mind, and so at last he went back to Liangshan Marsh to report the matter, while the other two continued on their way. Guansheng and his 5,000 men duly reached Lingzhou. Inside the town, colonels Shan and Wei had received their orders from the prefect, and had made all arrangements for a march on Liangshan Marsh. When they heard of the arrival of the brigands, they were angry, and marched out their soldiers to oppose them. When the two armies met, Guanxing rode forth. Immediately a man also rode out from the imperial army. He wore a square iron helmet surmounted by a large plume. His armor was of bearskin covered with iron plates, under which was a black silk gown embroidered with kingfisher blue flowers. He wore a pair of leather shoes decorated with a design in white, and a leather belt studded with metal plates engraved with lions. He rode a coal-black horse, and was armed with a bow and quiver full of arrows, and a spear. Behind him was a soldier carrying a black flag on which were 7 characters in silver, Shan Tinggoe, the water god general. Another officer also rode forth from the imperial troops, and he wore a vermilion-colored helmet with a design in gold surmounted by a red plume, armor decorated with rings in which were animals done in metals, and under that a red silk gown embroidered with animals and clouds in colors. His leather boots were decorated with a chiline in kingfisher blue. He was armed with a bow, arrows, and a sword, and rode a roan-colored horse. In front of him marched a soldier bearing a red flag on which were 7 characters in silver, Wei Dinghua, the fire god general. Guanxing, sitting on his horse, addressed these 2 colonels. "It is a long time since we parted." The 2 colonels laughed and abused him, saying, "You inefficient upstart and rebellious profligate. You have been ungrateful to the emperor's benevolence, and your ancestors would be ashamed of you. You have no modesty. You bring these armed men here now. What have you to say?" "You 2 commanders are mistaken," replied Guansheng. "At present the emperor is a weakling, traitorous ministers are in power, only relatives are employed, and officials are impeached for petty personal enmity. Our commander Song Jiang is benevolent, just, loyal, and sincere, and is acting according to the will of heaven. He has instructed me to come here and invite both of you to join him at Liangshan Marsh." Both colonels were very angry at this speech and dashed forward to attack him. They looked like a black cloud and a red cloud threatening a storm. Before they came near, Hao Siwen and Xianzan rode forth from both sides of Guansheng and engaged the opposing men. Sword clashed with sword and spear clanked with spear, so that there seemed to be chilly flashes of bloody struggle. Guanxing looked on, and admired the great skill displayed by all the combatants. During the fight, however, both colonels turned their horses at the same time, and withdrew. Hao Siwen pursued Shan Tingui right into the army, where the latter turned to the left. Xianzan pursued Wei Dinghua, who turned to the right. When they had nearly caught up to the colonels, they suddenly found themselves surrounded by soldiers armed with hooked poles who closed in, pulled them off their horses, and made them prisoners. The prisoners were at once dispatched to Lingzhou, while the main body of soldiers moved forward to attack the brigands. Guanxing was surprised at the quick defeat and ordered his men to retreat. But they had only gone a short distance when Guanxing saw another body of brigands in charge of Lin Chong, and they joined in the fight against the imperial troops, who soon retreated to their camp. The two prisoners were placed in a cart and dispatched at once to the eastern capital, while the two colonels were rewarded for the success attained. The prisoners were escorted by 300 soldiers, and on the way they passed close to the Kusha mountain. There they were attacked by brigands, in front of whom was their new leader Li Kuei with his 2 axes, and close behind him was Jiao Ting. Turning round to escape, the captain of the escort found that in their rear was a big man with a complexion like a copper kettle, no other than Bao Su, armed with a double-edged sword. Bao Su hacked the captain on the spot, and the escort all began to run away, and in a minute there was nobody left with the prisoner's cart. Li Kuei released the prisoners, and asked for an explanation of their having been captured. Xianzan also asked Li Kuei how he had come that way, and Li Kuei told them how he had made friends with Bao Su at the Kusha mountain, and now came down the mountain to attack the escort of Xianzan and Hao Siwen. Bao Su invited them all to come to his stronghold on the mountain, where he provided a feast. During the festivities, Hao Siwen said that as Bao Su and his men were willing to join with the brigands at Liangshan Marsh, they should first join in the attack on Lingzhou. Bao Su agreed to this, and arrangements were made accordingly. When the news of the disaster to the escort reached Lingzhou, Colonel Shan Tingui was angry, and said, "If we arrest those 2 men this time, we must execute them here, and not send them to the eastern capital." Just then another report came that Guanxing was advancing to attack the town. Immediately Colonel Shan Tingui mounted his horse, and led his 500 soldiers outside the town. When near the brigands, the flags separated, and Colonel Shan rode forward by himself, and shouted at Guanxing, "You disgrace to your country! You defeated general! You are deserving death!" Guanxing, hearing this, urged his horse forward, whirling his sword aloft. After about 50 bouts, Guanxing turned his horse and galloped off, followed closely by Colonel Shan Tingui. Guanxing led Colonel Shan a long distance away from his troops, and then turning his head he called out, "Why not dismount and submit now? What time are you waiting for?" But instead of doing this, Colonel Shan attempted to stab Guanxing in the back with his spear, but Guanxing, seeing the movement, shouted, "Down you go," and cut the spear with his sword, and this upset the balance of Colonel Shan, who fell off his horse. Guanxing sprang from his horse and ran to raise his enemy and said, "Please forgive me." Colonel Shan replied, "I humbly submit to you." "When I was at Liangshan Marsh," said Guanxing, "I very often spoke highly of you to Song Jiang. So I have specially come here to request both of you to join us in the cause of justice. I am willing to do my best and cooperate with you in carrying out the will of heaven," said Colonel Shan. They then mounted their horses and rode off abreast. When Lin Chong saw them riding together like this, he asked for an explanation. Now Guanxing did not want to say anything about the defeating of Colonel Shan, so he replied, "In this secluded spot, we talk about our old friendship, and I will try to induce him to join us." They were all pleased at this. Colonel Shan then went back to his troops, and waving his hand called out, "Let all my men come over here," and his 500 black jackets all joined the brigands. Those who did not wish to do so returned to the town, and reported this matter to the prefect. In the town, Colonel Wei Dinghua was exceedingly angry when he heard of this desertion, and the following day he led his men outside the town and challenged the brigands to battle. In front of the brigands he saw Colonel Shan Tingui and Guanxing and Lin Chong, so he rode forward and shouted at them, "You have forgotten the graciousness of our ruler, and have become mean rebels. At this Guanxing only laughed, and whipping his horse dashed forward, and fought with Colonel Wei Dingwa. After about 10 bouts Colonel Wei turned his horse, and ran away followed by Guanxing. But Colonel Shan called out, "Do not pursue him," and immediately Guanxing stopped his horse. Just then the ranks of the soldiers opened, and about 50 carts rushed out. These were piled up with burning reeds and grass. They were pushed by soldiers who carried on their backs iron cauldrons containing sulfur emitting large volumes of smoke. As they came near the brigands, all fell down on all sides, men and horses. Guanxing seeing this gave orders for a general retreat, and after withdrawing his men for about 3 li he called a halt. Colonel Wei seeing the brigands retreating marched his soldiers back to the town. But as he drew near he was surprised to see the town on fire in various parts. This was because when Colonel Wei left the town with his soldiers another body of brigands from the Kusha mountain in charge of Bao Su and Li Kuei entered the town by the north gate and started to loot and set fire to the houses. Colonel Wei dared not enter the town, and just as he was going to withdraw Guanxing and his brigands had come upon him. So he decided to retreat to the neighboring town of Zhongling County, which he duly reached. Guanxing had however closely followed him, and surrounded the town with his brigands. But Colonel Wei did not offer to fight, and kept the gates carefully defended and guarded. Seeing this Colonel Shan spoke to Guanxing and Lin Chong, "This man is very brave, and would rather die than submit to a defeat. We must therefore take a broad view of the position, and not press him too closely. Instead of fighting I will go by myself into the town, and persuade him to join us. I can talk him over and induce him to submit to you without fighting." Guanxing was much pleased, and agreed to the proposal. Shan Tingui went into the town alone, and was duly announced, and taken in to see Colonel Wei Dingwa. He said, "Just now the court is misguided, and stupid ministers are in power. So it would be better for us both join Song Jiang at Liangshan Marsh, and there wait until corrupt officials retire when we may change our course and surrender to the court." Wei Dingwa was turning this over in his mind for some time before he spoke. "If they really wish me to surrender, Guanxing himself should come here and make the proposal. If he does not come I would rather die than go." Shan Tingui then took his leave and duly reported the conversation to Guanxing, who said, "I am not an important person, but he holds me in such a wrong esteem." He at once mounted his horse and was ready to go to the town. But Lin Chong remonstrated with them, "It is hard to know men's intentions, and you had better think the matter over carefully before acting." "He is my old friend so you need not suspect anything," said Guanxing. So he set off, and when Colonel Wei saw him he was much pleased, and at once agreed to submit and go with them. He invited him to dine, and during the meal they talked about old times when they were colleagues. That evening Colonel Wei left the town with his 500 soldiers, and surrendered to the brigands. The next day they all set out for Liangshan Marsh. We will now relate what important news had reached Liangshan Marsh. Our feelings know that language fine is subtle, like a hook on lint. The hook is cast, and soon the man is captured by the courtesan.